Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. Today we have an important discussion with therapist Jamie Lerner on the value of taking care of yourself. Our thesis is this: if you don't exercise intentional care for yourself, you will be absolutely no good to anyone else. On this show, Jamie and I are keenly interested in the details of self-care, both emotionally and tangibly. What exactly can you do on a regular basis to build your own emotional bank account so that you have plenty left over to give to others? With that, on with the show. Jamie Lerner, how fun to have you once again on the next chapter with Charlie. Welcome.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me again.
Again, yeah. You know, Jamie, the last time we did a podcast together, it was show number 60, and today we are recording show number 183, and that was just over 3 years ago in January 2018.
Oh, my goodness. Well, it's great to be back.
Well, it's great to have you back. I had such a fun time last time, and so I'm looking forward to it. I have to tell you, and I want everybody to know that 3 years ago, Jamie, you gave me some personal advice. Now I don't know if you gave it to me personally or if it was done on the air, but you told me, we were talking about my difficult childhood, and you told me to quit looking through the eyes of a child and look at my childhood through the eyes of an adult. And you know, that sticks with me today, that anytime I think about that, I think through the eyes of an adult, and I think about that situation entirely differently because of you.
Well, thank you. It's nice sometimes to have a different perspective.
Well, yeah, and it's nice sometimes to have somebody that can offer you that perspective. So, before we immerse ourselves in our topic today, as I was reading a bit, I would love to hear you speak on a couple of things that you wrote on your website. And I'd like to know what you mean by two things. One, you are a pleasure junkie. I love that. And secondly, you're in what you're calling your third life. You're too young for a third life, so I'm very curious what those are all about.
I spend a lot of time doing things that give me pleasure. That is, in many ways, I think that that's really looked down upon in the society, that if we are to indulge ourselves and do things that please us. However, I gravitate towards things that really connect me and bring me a lot of joy. And my life is really about that connection with myself, lots of pleasure, and then, of course, service to all. And it's interesting because I think that when we nurture and nourish ourselves into the connections that we're having and then recreating with ourselves, that we become so filled up that we just spill over into and onto everyone around us in a really lovely way. So I like to think of myself as the living, breathing example of all that is possible when we are really, relaxing into self-care, finding pleasure, and sharing ourselves in a way that's lovely.
You know, I so agree with you, and I'm sort of into pleasure. I read so much of the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius and Seneca the Younger, but I noticed Seneca quoting Epicurus, and so I read Epicurus, and unfortunately his Epicurean philosophy has been bastardized into some kind of drinking and what do you call those things? Those sexual things? Orgies. Yes. And what do you call those things? What do you call? Shows. Where I live. But that doesn't represent Epicurus at all. Epicurus was in sort of sackcloth, but he was all about life is to be enjoyed. Life is a pleasurable experience, and I really resonate with that. And I think you're right that when you live a pleasurable life, you live an attractive life. I like that, the way you put that. So talk about attractive lives. What the heck is a third life?
Well, I'm probably on my fifth life by now, but I had my children very young. I had my profession very young. I have grandchildren.
No way.
Oh, yes, I have 4 grandchildren, 4 beautiful grandchildren. And the most wonderful thing is that I was there and assisted in each and every one of the births, which was amazing, like a separate life in itself. But
Yes.
I just think that we are reinventing ourselves over and over and over again, and especially women. I think that we have this ability to just continue to evolve and just reinvent ourselves. So I think I will probably have 9 lives by the time I'm done, which is wonderful.
Well, I can certainly identify, but you know what really rouses my curiosity, and that is because female leadership and female wisdom is very important to me, that the divine feminine is a very important aspect to me. And so I'm just curious, why do you think that women would have maybe more opportunity or more likelihood to reinvent themselves?
Because I think we have to. That's why. I think that women, we take on so many different roles and we wear so many different hats that it just becomes a part of who we are. I think that especially now, women have a much greater opportunity to do just that, to continue to reinvent themselves. But a lot of it is because they need to.
I'm going off chart here. What does reinventing yourself look like? Because I wrote a book 25 years ago that was ahead of its time. That was called Getting the Right Things Right, Personal Strategies for Reinventing the Life You Want. And that was long before anything was written on reinventing. So I have my ideas about reinvention, but I'm curious, what are yours?
Well, I mean, just look at what's happening now. You know, women, and probably men too, are out of the workplace and in their homes, and they're teachers. They're needing to become teachers and literally assist their children in learning every day with remote learning. I mean, women are masters at adapting to whatever is needed. We just are, and we're very well equipped to do it. And this also interesting thing about reinvention is that we lose a lot of something that is very important along the way, which is self-care. So women are masterful in reinventing themselves, and then they also are masterful in forgetting themselves.
How did you know we were going to make a transition to self-care? I mean, seriously, on my sheet in front of me, the next bullet point was self-care, and you made a wonderful transition to it. So that is what I'd like to talk about now, and focus probably the majority of our time is self-care and personal responsibility, and especially in this current COVID time of chaos and confusion. And one of the things that you told me about when we chatted before the podcast was that you describe your passion, your current passion for helping people find themselves in the moment. Can you tell me what that means to you, finding yourself in the moment?
Every moment that we can be present, and it's just a moment by moment, and establish or reestablish a connection with ourselves, that is the ultimate in self-care. And I think a lot of that comes from being able to manage our thoughts and then our feelings, but first and foremost our thoughts. And I think it's important that we really slow everything down and allow ourselves to be in that moment. To me, that's like one of the most important things of how we can care for ourselves and then others. It's always about self first and then others. So it's kind of a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, Jesus talks about that when he says, it's always quoted, love God and love your neighbor, but what's always left out is love your neighbor as yourself. And to me, that assumes self-love precedes other love.
Yes, because how can you love or care for another if you're not taking care of yourself?
Self-love is it's almost frowned upon that you are selfish, you are egocentric if you do that, and if you take care of yourself too much, and yet if you don't take care of yourself, you're no good to anyone else.
When you get on the airplane, they tell you to put your mask on, oxygen mask on first before assisting other people. And there is a reason for that. I mean, that is, I would say, a universal truth. We cannot care for anyone until we care for ourselves without feeling resentment. And if we feel resentment, then we are not caring for ourselves or another. So, I think that people don't really understand what it means to wrap their loving arms around themselves and nourish and nurture themselves into connection. That is the most unselfish thing that you can do. And in some ways, it's your responsibility if you are then going to assume the care of others, whether it be children or if you're a teacher or if you're in any role where you're in a leadership role. It's just not plausible to do it without having spent some time with yourself and nourishing yourself and give yourself something to give.
I so agree with you on that. And I was thinking about taking care of ourselves. There's just a number of ways to do that, and we're going to get into tactics toward the end of the show. But right now, I'd like to just sort of get a big picture of what do you mean by taking care of yourself. I know I have an idea of what I mean by it, but I'm curious what your interpretation is.
It kind of goes hand in hand with taking personal responsibility to understand that really it is no one's responsibility to care for you. It's your responsibility to begin to have an understanding of what you're needing for yourself. And then to figure out a way, a gentle and loving way, to kind of implement some of that self-care. And most people do the opposite. They expect other people to care for them. They don't even know their own needs, but they expect others around them to know what they need, and they expect that they should be given what they need. There's this really kind of a twisted sense of entitlement. It just gets very warped, I think. The other interesting thing about women reinventing themselves is then they get to hide behind all of the roles that they've taken on, and they never care for themselves. They end up feeling resentful. They end up feeling overwhelmed. They end up feeling all the things that they should be feeling, and yet no one even knows what they need, not even them. They haven't even taken the time to figure out, like, okay, what do I need for myself? What do I need to do first thing in the morning so that I can fill myself up before I take care of all these other people? So to step into that role of personal responsibility first thing in the morning and ask yourself, what do I need for myself? That is such a loving and lovely question to ask oneself. And then to answer it with, I need to maybe have coffee before I serve coffee. I need to eat something before I serve the meal. Just some basic things that really remind us that we're important.
Do you know how countercultural that is? Because
yes, I do.
We're thinking we always have to be givers, don't we? That we can't be takers, or we can't be, and it's not even really taking. It's more of filling. You're giving love from an empty cup, and you've got to fill up that love, your love cup for yourself.
You do, because unless you do, you end up resenting the very people that you are serving. And it doesn't feel good on your end. It doesn't feel good on their end either. It never feels good to be given something from someone who is resenting you in the process. So, yes, to unconditionally give with two hands, that is a lovely feeling for the giver and the receiver. And the way we get there is by taking care of ourselves first so that we can give with two hands. That's the ultimate goal, to feel good about the giving and to feel good about the person who is receiving what you're giving.
I have for the last year been very involved on my own in the sort of tradition known as mystic Christianity, and the mystics, and I'm reading people of the 13th to 14th century, Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross, and Teresa of Avila is sort of my guru now, and she was in the 15th century. And they talk about spending this time in divine, contemplative, mystical prayer, but she is very strong that you do that, and in doing that, you are taking care of yourself, your relationship with yourself in the divine, how you relate in the divine, but that then becomes the resource for helping others. That,
absolutely.
So you don't just
example.
Yeah, you don't just focus on yourself. I mean, and forget everybody else. You have to focus on yourself. But then the result is it results in a self-care. You can't help but want to share that with other people.
Exactly. It really works. And once again, it's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, what a beautiful idea. Now you talked about personal responsibility, and I've even thought about making when I make a title for this show, and we'll see what happens after the show if they make the title. But I'm working on a premise of, let me look at my own title here: self-care, your responsibility to be responsible for yourself.
Lovely.
Is it? So
yes.
So you would that's good. I'm glad you agree, because it would be an odd title if you said no. I don't believe any of that.
However, it's a turnoff for people. A lot of people do not want to be responsible for themselves. They feel resentful that they should have to be responsible for themselves. They feel entitled that others should be responsible for their happiness. And I think that it just needs to be thought about in a different way, because who would know better for you than you? Nobody. And yet we expect others to know what we need and what we want. So consider yourself first. First and foremost, what do you need? It's a great question. People don't ask themselves that question very often. What do you want? People don't ask themselves that either. But people will tell you all day long what they don't want. And what they get is more of what they don't want. So, and it's always someone else's fault. So, it doesn't work very well that way.
No, it doesn't. And how in the world, like you said, if we haven't even really investigated, been through the thought process of understanding what we want and what we like in life, how in the world is someone else supposed to know that?
Great question. Yeah.
And yet we expect them to satisfy our needs, and we've not identified their needs. I mean, our needs and how they need to respond. My listeners have heard this before, but my wife and I, we've been married 36 years, and for at least 25 of those, if not more, we take every year between Christmas and New Year's. Now, this happens throughout the year, but we take an intentional time of 3 days away so we can have 2 nights in one place, 2 full days in a place. And we ask each other, so how was I? What kind of husband was I last year? What kind of wife was I? And what do you want from me? How can I serve you? And helping you helping you fulfill your needs. And so we're forcing ourselves to identify our own needs and then tell the other person, this is what I would like.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's a conscious creation of a relationship. How nice is that?
Yeah. Yeah. You know who does a lot of good writing on that, Jamie, are you familiar with Alain de Botton, depends on how you want to pronounce it, The School
No.
of Life? You know, he's written
No.
really good stuff on that. He's written maybe the best stuff of love between a man and a woman as anyone has written. He's just barely turned 40 now. But he just has exceptional writing on that. You know what I want to do? I want to go a bit deeper, but before we do, I'd like to take a quick break, and then we will come back, and we're going to pursue a little bit more about this personal responsibility and how the victim mentality may come into play in that. Hi there, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie, and my very special guest today is Jamie Lerner, a woman who is a therapist, adventurer, pleasure seeker, and a cute devotee of self-care, and that's exactly what we're talking about. and I think she has so much to teach us that I have learned so much from Jamie. And Jamie, we've talked a bit about personal responsibility and that letting other people know, not expecting other people to somehow be able to read our minds and our souls and understand what we need, that we need to articulate that. What other kinds of personal responsibility? You know, we're talking about our own personal responsibility and our self-care. How can I take responsibility for myself? Do you have any examples of that for me?
Well, you know, I think that we are rewarded in the society for being victims. I think that mainstream media, that they remind us every moment that we are the victim of everything. We have no control. So for me, I always suggest to people to turn off the television and to find a news source that is a little more emotionally intelligent, that will allow you to feel good when you're done reading it or listening to it or watching it, instead of feeling paralyzed. Because we have to take personal responsibility for what we are choosing to consume and how we will feel when we are done consuming that kind of media.
You know, that's brilliant. You know, is that we have to take responsibility for what we consume in our media. And I find pretty much nothing but danger when, and not just TV in general, but for me, it's TV news. And TV news, you know, their purpose is to stir up controversy and stir up resentment and anger, and that victim mentality. It is so common on and it's not one political side or the other. It's all. It is just so unhealthy because it doesn't teach self-responsibility. It doesn't teach being rewarded for not for being a victim, but be rewarded for being a personal or self-hero. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, but also what's more important is how do you feel after you consume that? Because if you are not feeling good, great clue for you, it's not working. And most people really feel paralyzed. They feel so stuck and shut down and the opposite of empowered. They feel very disempowered. So there are many other choices that one could make in terms of how they were going to get their news of the day. And it's our personal responsibility to be more discerning and to choose something that allows us to get what we need and then move along and feel good.
Yeah. I like that. You know, as I read your and on your website, which we will post in our show notes, that tells people, instructs people how to get a hold of you and how to participate. You have coaching sessions that are, you know, I took a look at them, and they're really good and very, 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 very helpful. And it's in what you call the integrative approach to well-being. And you wrote something, Jamie, that really struck me, and that was, sometimes we simply need permission to redirect ourselves inward, back to that most important relationship, the one that we have with ourselves. And I like the word permission, that we need to give ourselves permission, because we're certainly not getting permission from our culture. So who determines where we are headed in life, if not ourselves? If we're looking for other people to determine our direction, we're going to end up in not the right place for us. We have to look within ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have all the answers, truly. And I think that when we are tuned in to ourselves, that we are guided to exactly what we are needing and wanting for ourselves. But there's nothing out there outside of us. It comes from the inside out. So I think that we would tune in, that we will navigate quite well for ourselves. And so trust that. It might be a little scary at first, but you always know the answers for yourself. No matter how, I mean, you probably don't know how or why, but you do. So I like to tell people to consider themselves as their own greatest resource.
Brilliant. And sometimes I have found with me that my choices are not necessarily really strongly sent conscious choices, but they are hints of intuition that this is the right move, or Charlie, there's something amiss here. You know, you can't identify it. All the facts look straight and all the facts look good to make this decision, but I've got this little haunting feeling that something is amiss, and I think we really need to pay attention to those haunting little feelings, because those are, I believe that's our soul's way of speaking to us.
Absolutely. It's our intuitive knowing, for sure.
Now, how does that work with something you said earlier that I was also struck by, and that was that we begin our change through thought, not through feelings, because feelings can be those victim feelings, they can be those desperate feelings and insecure feelings and lack of confidence feelings, but I agree with you that they begin with thought. So how do you see thought intersecting with intuition?
I ask people if they could start tuning into the internal dialogue that they're having with themselves, probably all day long. What are the conversations that you're having with yourself? And it's interesting because usually they're not very nice. People say some really not nice things about themselves, to themselves, and about others all day long. So when we begin to become more conscious, how we're speaking to ourselves and how we're feeling, what we're watching on television and how we're feeling, and we start to make some connections between the dialogue in our own head, the dialogue on television, then I think that we can take a moment and ask ourselves, is this working? And usually it's not working. It isn't feeling good. And at that point, then you have a choice. Then you get to start sifting, the process called selectively sifting, where you get to kind of sift through the information and begin to focus on the parts that actually does feel good. And if none of it feels good, then you really need to find a completely different source or change the tone of the conversation that you're having with yourself about yourself and others. Really a great way to start being very discerning about where you're putting your attention.
Now that requires a bit of self-confidence, doesn't it? Or, how do you do confidence to trust yourself, that you've spent so long questioning yourself and spent so long telling yourself negative stories about yourself because, we remember those more than the positive stories. How do we develop that confidence and trust in ourselves that we really are adequate, more than adequate? We're probably the best source, not probably, we are the best source of information for ourselves. How do we develop that kind of confidence?
Well, once again, I think that wherever that came from, it probably was from long ago. So it's like what you had mentioned earlier. If you could begin to look at those experiences through the eyes of your now, where you are right here and now as an adult, I think that you would see them very differently. And then you would be able to use a little bit of emotional intelligence and allow yourself to shift from the thought that it's not true. It's just not true. So we tend to drag vibrationally and otherwise a lot of stuff from whenever and just play it over and over and over again. It's kind of like a mantra without fact checking. We need to fact check. Just like we need to fact check the news, we need to ask ourselves, like, is this even really true? And 99% of it isn't. It's not true. Whatever that was from whoever told you those things, it doesn't apply today. It's not relevant. So what does apply? What is relevant? How are you feeling about you? Not how are you feeling because someone told you what you were. There's a big difference. But as adults, once again, we have to take personal responsibility and begin to ask ourselves those kinds of questions so that we can get the facts straight and start to feel better.
That's a great idea, is that we're in the age of fact-checking, and it's always about the other, and it's about, news. But we need to fact-check about ourselves and say, is what we believe about ourselves, is that based on a current reality, or is that based on some experience that I had in the past, and very likely in early childhood, but it goes on certainly through adolescence, it goes on through our whole life, but we allow negative experiences to dominate our thought patterns about ourselves rather than the positive experiences. And it takes a real choice. I had to wrestle with that. It takes a real choice to remember the positive, because I had a tendency to look back, even though I had what would be considered successful and a rather healthy adult life, but I would look back at it and I would only see the negatives, emotionally. That would just all that would come to my mind, and I had to make, I'm fond of the term conscious choice. I had to make a conscious choice not to do that, to take a look and remind myself of the good things that happened in life. And you know what? Doggone it, Jamie, the good things that I did. I did some good things. I actually, and that's, I know that's going to sound very egocentric, but I have to admit those. If I don't admit those, where am I?
But that doesn't sound egocentric at all. That sounds like you having a real honest conversation with yourself about who you are and where you are. Taking responsibility. That's fantastic.
Do you think this is something that is easier with someone like myself who is entering that later phase of life, I am, just post 70, and I'm finding wisdom really beginning to come, and And I'm seeing life very differently than I did in my first half. Richard Rohr breaks it into just two halves. The first half and the second half. And the first half is very appropriately driven by ego building, that we need to build ego. And second half is assuming that we have our ego built and we can dismiss it and we can lose it and we can be centered on love and centered on giving that love. Do you think this approach is easier as you get older than it is when you're younger?
I think it depends how tired one is of not being happy. And when you give people a choice and you let them know that being happy and connected to yourself and feeling good about yourself is an option, I think that opens the door for people, because a lot of people don't even know that that's even possible. So, the other thing is that if you are unhappy and you want to stay there, that's fine, but take responsibility for it. Say, I am miserable. I have no interest in being happy. I have no interest in reevaluating how I feel and what happened. And I applaud that. I say, that's fantastic. You've made a really good choice for yourself. You're not a victim to anything. And that is powerful. But you cannot go through your whole life blaming everybody for everything, no matter how awful it was early on. And chances are, a lot of the strengths that you have as a person today were as a result of some of those things that happened when you were younger or in an earlier part of your life. And you should embrace that and own it and feel really good about it. And possibly even thank those people for giving you the opportunity to be who you are today because of that.
Yeah, I've learned through mentors and personal coaches that there have been voices that have inside of me that want to protect me, and that I need to be cautious about stepping out because I could get hurt. And they are just simply voices from long ago that says, don't do this because you can get hurt. And what I have learned to do is not necessarily reject those offhand, but to understand that those are protective voices, and I need to thank those voices. Thank you for trying to protect me. I understand what you tried to do, but you are no longer necessary.
And that's very powerful.
It
there
is.
Was a time and a place for that, and this is no longer the time or the place. So, that's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. You know what I'd like to do is, as we're beginning to, I was going to say we're beginning to wrap up a little bit, but I do have to, I want to keep quoting you because you are so quotable as I read. And I just liked your phrase, and I think, it just reinforces to what we've been talking about so far, and that you said that we all need to indulge in self-care. There's something about that verb, indulge. I like that. I like self-indulgement. And, it's, again, not socially popular, but that we need to indulge in the self-care so we can live. I mean, as you said, so many choose to live unhappy lives thinking they're victim or thinking that they're powerless. And therefore, as a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and addictions, what we did is that we just numbed it. We rather than deal with anything, just numb our way out of it. And that's no solution because that doesn't end up healthy and
it doesn't work. I mean, if it worked, I would say, great, do it. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But feeling really good and then having a drink, if you're not an alcoholic, to accentuate your already good feeling, that's great. Or to feel really good and then to sit down and eat a pint of ice cream because you're already feeling good and you just want to feel better, that works. But to eat ice cream to feel better, it doesn't work. Or to have a drink, then those become guilty pleasures.
Yes, and I am a non-addicted ice cream eater, and so maybe a couple of times a month I will get a pint of Ben and Jerry's, and there is no pretending that I'm going to eat half of it. I've tried to just say I'm going to eat half of it.
Nor should you. Nor should you. Just
eat that whole thing. And, I only eat twice a day. I do intermittent fasting. My weight is great. I'm healthy, so I can afford the pound. And knowing that I'm not going to take it, I'm not going to have any for a week. And, the pound will go in a couple days. And, men are so fortunate we can lose weight so easily compared to women. Yeah, men, talk about women and men. What my wife has to go through, I thank God daily I'm not a woman. It is just all the stuff that she has to do. And I don't have to go through any of that. I'd like to spend time, our last few minutes, on a couple of things here. And I think we've probably covered it I want to rehearse what you and I talked about, some tips for indulgent self-care. One of them was to reduce or completely lose our intake of television, especially news. And then I even noticed, Jamie, some things that were, I like crime dramas sometimes. But sometimes they're just too much. They're just too dark, and I just don't feel good afterward. I just say, boy, it just shows the evil side of people, and it is not good for me. And I've told my wife, I think we need to quit watching this show. I can't handle it. And I think when you recognize that, the best thing to do is, even if you're in the middle of it, just say enough. I'm going to go watch Mozart in the Jungle.
So to honor how you're feeling when you're doing whatever it is that you're doing that isn't feeling good. Honor it and make a conscious choice to do something different.
Yes, honor it, and I would add, and to recognize and to give yourself permission that you can stop a television series halfway through. Say, this was not good for me. Even though I'm curious how it ends, the process of getting there is not good for me.
Yeah, and that even goes for a book you're reading. A lot of people, they get halfway through a book, they're not enjoying it one bit, but they feel compelled to finish it. It's like, wow. Why would you waste all that time reading something that isn't interesting to you and doesn't feel good? I don't get it.
Oh, that's, gosh, you're preaching to the choir, Jamie. I believe if I'm not into a book by 25 pages, it's gone. And then after 100 or 150 pages, if I think I've caught the gist of the book, I'm done. Because so many books are repeating themselves in the second half, already what they said in the first half, because publishers have a formula. They want so many pages. They want 180 or 240 pages. And even though you were done with the book at 120, you just have to add fluff. And I know enough about publishers to know that I don't have to read the fluff. I can read, if I get what I want in the first half, I just will put the book down and go with another.
Yeah, I think that's great. So you're not a quitter.
No. No, you're.
No,
as a matter of fact, you're the opposite. I think.
Yeah.
I think you're an adventurer. You say, I've already reached the mountain of this book. This book is just the old Pareto 80-20 rule. I've gotten 80% out of it. I don't need to read 80% out of the first half. I don't need to read the second half for the 20%, unless I choose to read the last chapter. Sometimes I'll do that. Yeah. I'll just go and read the last chapter. I want to talk about, you mentioned emotional self-awareness, EQ. I'm a big believer in knowing myself emotionally, what drives me, what haunts me, where I'm strong and where I may have deficiencies. Our Are you a fan of emotional intelligence?
I really am, and I think that I think it's really helpful if you're in any kind of parenting role, leadership role, relationship with somebody. I think it's a really good skill. Yes, I do.
Yeah, and
it helps us a lot to be emotionally intelligent. It helps us navigate every single situation.
do you like the instruments, the EQ instruments, or any of those things? Or any that you're a fan of over others?
Well, I like the concepts that are simple to break down so people understand what emotional intelligence is and how they can tap into it at any given moment. Because we all have the ability to be emotionally intelligent without taking a test.
Yeah, that is good. And, you continue, I'm gathering from our conversation, you continue to emphasize that you already have pretty much everything you need to know. You just need to access it and to consciously access it and to listen to yourself and to pay attention to yourself. And sometimes that's journaling, sometimes that's meditation or some solitary practice of identifying what is in your core, taking that time to clear your mind best you can and understand what's driving you. And I think we would all be shocked to know that we already know what we need. If we just...
We absolutely do.
Yeah, you believe that?
Absolutely, 100% do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. But I think we're so used to everyone else telling us what we need, which is, it's interesting, and it's difficult because on one hand, everyone's telling us what we need, and on the other hand, we're asking others to give us what we need, and we're never asking ourselves, like, but what do I need? Every product that's being sold is being sold to us because someone's telling us what we need. But do we ask ourselves, like, but what do we need? That's the most important question. Like, what do you need? What do you need in this moment, and in the next moment, and in the next? So it's a great question. You could probably ask yourself that every single moment of the day and give yourself a moment to listen for the answer. It will come to you.
But you know what I think we need, Jamie? And I think so many people need is we don't need gurus, but we need guides. Because we're not used to asking ourselves those questions. We are unfamiliar with those questions. We don't even, first of all, we don't even know where to go to answer the questions. And then if we get answers, we have a difficult time interpreting them. And that's why a guide or a coach or someone to talk to, just a peer that's working through that with you. I think it's helpful not to take this journey by yourself.
Yes, but on the other hand, when you ask yourself a question and you are quiet enough to listen for the answer, you are guided to exactly where you need to be.
Can you give me an example of that? Do you have a personal example of how you came across that?
Well, even when somebody is asking themselves a question and then they all of a sudden are struck with an inspiration to Google search something or to look up a resource. And then they have a list of resources, and maybe there's 10 of them, but intuitively they're attracted to one. So then they click on that, and that looks interesting, but, they read a little bit about it, and it doesn't feel as good as they thought. So they go back and they look at another one, and that one feels a little better. So they go a little further and explore that, and they think, wow, this really resonates with me. And so I think if we give ourselves the time and the opportunity to trust ourselves, that we can intuitively be guided to what we are needing for ourselves if we ask the question and then are quiet enough to hear the answer.
Is it helpful to journal that, Jamie?
I think for everybody it's different. Everyone has a different process.
Uh-huh.
But I think we are inspired at times to do things. We don't even know, what inspired us, but we're like, we feel like, oh my God, what a coincidence. Or, I was so lucky that I found this resource. There are no coincidences, and you weren't lucky. But intuitively, you were guided, and you trusted your intuition. So you get to take personal responsibility for that too. Or just the opposite. If you're working with someone and it's not feeling right, it's not right. Find someone else to work with. Trust yourself. Nobody should be telling you what you need to be working on and what you need to be doing. You know. You know what you need to be doing. And you know what you need to be working on. And take personal responsibility and find someone who will support that. People end up in therapy for years and years and years. They get nowhere. It's just unbelievable. But they don't even know they had an option to get out of therapy. It's just, oh my goodness. Talk about stuck.
Yeah, that is that guru oriented that we feel in an odd sort of way. It is almost like a victim in that we don't trust our capacity to know about ourselves when we feel like we need an expert to tell us about ourselves. We need someone to, and you're consistent in arguing that we don't need experts, that we have everything we need already built inside of us. We just need to discover processes, perhaps, and confidence in discovering that ourselves.
Yes, and I think we are experts for ourselves. I don't think we're experts for other people. I don't consider myself an expert for anybody.
Do you know how rare that is?
Really good.
But you know how rare that is, Jamie? That is a wonderful place, but I don't know how many people really feel expert in themselves. That they feel lost in themselves. I don't know what I want. If I only knew what my purpose in life was, if I only knew what I was here to do and to accomplish, and if I only knew what self-fulfillment would mean to me, because we have so many conflicting sources out there telling us this is what you need, this is what you don't need, and in our American self-help culture is almost destructive.
I think there is, though, more consciousness and more self-awareness and more empowerment to discover self. I think that is certainly, you can find many more resources today about that than ever before. And I also think that if you break it down to in this moment, what's my purpose in this moment? What is my need in this moment? It just makes it so much easier. And it forces us to stop and to be in the moment, which is really a lovely place to be. And then on to the next moment. And it's just a series of moments. And hopefully within all of that, a lot of pleasure and good feeling.
That is so good. And so to wrap up our time, what I want to do is talk about the coaches and guides for those of us that may not be exactly clear on the process. You have on your website, you have a process that people can contact you, and for ever so brief encounters, I think you even called them quickies.
A new service I have. It's called the Quickie, a lovely texting option. Yes, it is. And but the other thing about working with me is when people contact me, they tell me how much time they want. They buy a block of time, and they tell me how much time they want. I don't tell them what they need. They tell me what they need. And so at the very beginning, I position the person as their own expert, which is really different. So you have to want to take a little personal responsibility to work with me.
Do you offer any kind of survey or assessment or something so they can help identify what they need? Because that's a very difficult question sometimes.
No, they don't really need to know what they need, but they need to know how much time they want for their session. So literally you buy a package of time and then you reach out to me and you say, for my first session, I would like 20 minutes. And I say, great. And then I reach out to the person, and we have 20 minutes. And for the next session, they get to ask themselves, like, okay, for this next session, how much time am I needing, Jamie? I'm not going to tell you what you need, but I'm so happy to accommodate whatever it is that you think. And therein lies take personal responsibility and beginning the process of trusting yourself, which is so nice.
It's great. Now I'm going to have your website where interested people can get in touch with you through your website, and I will have the URL. But just for on the air, what is the website address, Jamie, that they can get you at?
It's www.jamie-lerner.com.
Oh, so
easy.
jamie-lerner.com. Yeah, and it will be, folks, it will be on the show notes, and so you can there'll be a link, and you can just tap in to get a hold of Jamie, and I really encourage you to do so. She's a masterful coach, and she will use this, what she calls integrative approach of life and self-learning. Jamie Lerner, what a treasure. Thank you so much for spending time with me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. And I want everyone to know that, as I said, that your website address will be posted on the show notes. I want to thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.